Camilla just executed what royal insiders are calling the most brazen and devastating power grab in the history of the modern British monarchy. Her secret plan was to secure royal titles for her children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, two individuals with absolutely no royal blood. And here's the part that is genuinely staggering: she almost succeeded. She had been quietly planning this for months and was dangerously close to pulling it off. But just before she could lock in her final move, Princess Anne unearthed every last document that Camilla was sure no one would ever see. Anne was reportedly appalled, calling the plan unbelievable for any parent. She then immediately took all the evidence straight to Prince William. And William's reaction didn't just put a stop to Camilla's plan, it permanently altered the entire power dynamic of the British royal family. So what was this shocking plan? Remember, Camilla is the woman Princess Diana famously called the third person in her marriage. And now, all these decades later, she was still grabbing for more power. She wanted her own kids elevated to the same royal rank as George Charlotte and Louis Diana's own grandchildren. Palace sources claim she was secretly lobbying for the Knight Commander of the Royal Victorian Order for Tom and the female equivalent of Dame for Laura. And you can be sure she didn't just randomly stumble upon those specific titles. She hunted for them. That's because those honours are in the King's personal gift to give. No parliament, no public vote, not a single debate needed. Charles could have simply signed them over in private, and the entire nation would have woken up, checked their phones, and discovered it was already a done deal. That was her whole strategy. But to really feel the shock of this, you have to rewind about 20 years. When Queen Elizabeth finally let Charles marry Camilla in 2005, that permission came with a price. There was one non-negotiable condition laid down by the Queen herself before any wedding planning was allowed to begin. Camilla would be Charles's wife, and she would become Queen Consort when the time came. But her children from her first marriage would remain exactly as they were, private citizens, with no titles, no royal duties, and no public money. Nothing. Elizabeth understood a fundamental truth that the rest of the palace tended to avoid. The British people would never ever accept the children of the woman who destroyed Diana's marriage being raised into the same royal hierarchy as the actual heirs to the throne. That single condition was her ticket into the family, and for nearly 2 decades that line held firm. It held because Elizabeth was still alive. The moment she passed away, everything changed. Within mere months of the Queen's death, Camilla moved with incredible speed. She instructed her private secretary to quietly start finding ways to grab royal titles for her children through back channels. They used administrative pathways so deeply buried that most palace staff wouldn't even see the paperwork moving. This was a woman who was clearly waiting for Elizabeth to die to finally get what the Queen had expressly forbidden. And from there it gets even darker, because Camilla didn't just move secretly, she waited for the perfect moment. She carefully calculated the exact time when the royal family would be too distracted to notice what she was plotting, and the moment she picked was the most cold-hearted one you can imagine. Palace insiders say the entire push was deliberately accelerated during the time surrounding King Charles's cancer diagnosis. While the entire palace was consumed with managing the king's illness, Camilla's private secretary was quietly filing the necessary documents in the background. She literally used the moment her husband was at his most frightened and vulnerable to inch her children closer to titles he had never publicly agreed to grant them. And this wasn't Camilla's first attempt, or even her second. This title plot was just the latest part of a campaign that had been happening for years, right out in the open. Just think back to May of 2023 and the Coronation, which was the most watched royal event in a generation. Camilla's 3 grandsons, Freddie Parker Bowles and the twins Gus and Louis Lopes, were made 3 of her 4 official pages of honour. This is a formal ceremonial role, and after the service they all appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony. This is the very same balcony that is strictly reserved for working members of the royal family only. They stood in the same row as Prince George. The whole world watched it happen, and most people saw a beautiful family moment, a grandmother with her grandkids. But from the institution's perspective, what had really just happened was something else entirely. It marked the first time in modern royal history that non-royal, non-working civilians without any royal title had been placed on that balcony in an official capacity. Camilla had successfully pushed her family into a sacred royal space, and because it was hidden by the spectacle of the coronation, nobody said a word. The few royal watchers who did raise an eyebrow were dismissed as being cynical. But Camilla had just done something very deliberate. She created a globally broadcast precedent. Her family could now stand in royal spaces. Her family could now hold royal positions. The coronation balcony was basically the test run. The title plan came next, built directly on that success. And what's more, someone had already sounded the alarm about her. In January of 2023, Prince Harry appeared on television before millions and accused Camilla of spending years secretly cultivating the British press. He said she was trading private family secrets for positive media coverage and forging relationships with journalists that were forbidden by the palace. He claimed her team was the one who leaked the story of his drug use back in 2002, and they twisted it into a tale about Charles being a concerned father. But it never happened that way. He insisted the story was completely manufactured to make Charles look good at Harry's expense. Harry called Camilla dangerous, not as a petty insult, but as a serious warning. He said she was a danger because of how deep her media connections went and how willing she was to trade secrets. And then he dropped a bombshell that nobody inside the palace has ever really answered for. He warned that with Camilla becoming queen consort, there were going to be bodies left in the street. He said it on television. The whole world heard him, and the palace simply ignored it. But here is what makes that warning so incredibly haunting today. The exact strategy Harry was describing in 2023 was the same one revealed by this new title plan years later. First step, get the public on her side. Second step, slide her family into royal events where they're seen but nobody questions it. Third step, lock it all in officially before anyone figures out what's happened. Harry knew exactly what she was up to and he told people, but nobody listened until Anne discovered the documents. So this is precisely how Camilla was pulling it off. For Tom, her plan was simple and underhanded. She had already started putting him in key spots at royal events positions that are reserved for people who actually hold an official royal title. No announcement, no clarification, no media buzz. He just kept appearing standing in the designated spots at the right functions until it all began to look perfectly ordinary, until people inside the palace would eventually check the record and conclude, well, he's been doing this for several years, no one complained, so it must be okay. That was the trap she was setting, one public appearance at a time. For her daughter Laura, the plan was even more shrewd. Camilla was quietly positioning her for a senior role, leading a royal charity. But here's the catch. That type of position legally demands that the person in charge holds an official royal title. So that title had to be secured first quietly and behind the scenes. Once the title existed on paper, the charity position would naturally follow. And when it was finally announced to the public, it would seem completely harmless. It would look like a devoted daughter stepping up to do some good work, a warm, natural, and even admirable move. Nobody would think to question it. But underneath all of that, the title would already be a done deal, already granted, and already officially on the books. And by the time anyone even considered challenging it, reversing it would require a massive and very public battle. That was her whole strategy, and it was working perfectly. And to accomplish all this without anyone sounding the alarm, Camilla avoided any kind of formal request for titles. That would have been too obvious and easily shut down. So instead she used a back-channel approach. She started initiating small, quiet adjustments to internal palace paperwork. Guest lists were slightly altered, internal memos were tweaked, and then something even more audacious occurred. A totally new category was invented within the palace system, one that had never existed before in royal history. It was called Extended Household Members with Ceremonial Eligibility. This was a label created out of thin air, designed specifically to create a path for Tom and Laura to be treated as if they possessed royal standing already. And to ensure no one could easily trace it back to her, all the requests were filed in a way that cleverly masked which office they originated from. So, on the surface, every single one of these little changes seemed absolutely routine, almost boring, just standard administrative updates that nobody would ever look at twice. And Camilla had even done her research. Her office had been discreetly studying a case from years ago that involved the Duchess of Kent's children. These were royals who weren't working members of the family but had still successfully received courtesy titles without any formal press announcement or public statement. That was precisely the model Camilla was following. It was her blueprint. She was absolutely convinced no one would notice what she was building. But she was dead wrong. Anne caught her in the nick of time. So Anne finds out. The reason Princess Anne found it is because she had never for a single day stopped watching Camilla. Anne was aware that Camilla's office had tried to secretly alter something it had no right to touch. Back in 2023, Anne had caught Camilla's private staff attempting to have a rule about Diana quietly erased from the official ceremonial handbook. This was a rule established specifically because Diana had been cut out of the very documents that dictate how the royal family handles its most significant ceremonies. Anne put a stop to it immediately and decisively, but that incident taught her a lesson she would never forget. It proved to her that Camilla's office was more than willing to operate in the shadows to get what it desperately wanted. Anne made her decision right then and there. She would keep watching every single day. She would not give that office another opportunity. What ultimately exposed the whole operation was a trusted source Anne had inside the palace staff, someone whose job was processing schedules and paperwork all day long. This individual went to Anne directly telling her that something felt deeply wrong, and what they described made Anne's blood run cold. The sheer number of quiet reclassification requests from Camilla's office over a mere 6-month period was unlike anything this person had seen in 30 years of palace service. That was everything Anne needed to hear. She began pulling documents that very week, and the deeper she dug, the worse the situation looked for Camilla. Because what Anne uncovered was that the requests had been submitted in a way that intentionally disguised which office was actually sending them. Anne followed every document, and every single paper trail, without a single exception, led directly back to one place, Camilla's office. And then Anne did something that shows you exactly who she is and why crossing her is one of the most foolish mistakes anyone in that palace can make. She made sure every piece of evidence was locked down airtight and completely impossible to deny or explain away. But it wasn't just what Camilla had done that made Anne so furious. It was when she chose to do it while Charles was literally fighting for his life. Anne reportedly called it the most profoundly disrespectful act Camilla had ever committed within that institution. Anne took everything she had gathered, walked it directly to William, and laid the entire thing out in front of him. And William's response took less than a single minute. William shuts it down hard. Anne presented the audit to William, and he reviewed it. He didn't say he had to talk to Charles first. He looked at the evidence in front of him and he gave a one-word answer, no. And then he made his position absolutely clear. No member of the Parker Bowles family would ever be granted a royal title as long as he had any say in the institution. Not Tom, not Laura, not anyone with that name or from that bloodline. The monarchy belongs to the true heirs. It belongs to George, Charlotte, and Louis. It is the birthright of the children of the throne. It does not belong to the offspring of the woman who destroyed his parents' marriage. What William did next was a total demolition. He demanded every classification change be reversed, every schedule adjustment be cancelled, and every document exploring titles be pulled and terminated immediately. Every bit of the foundation Camilla had spent months so carefully and quietly building was torn down and buried in a single afternoon. And he didn't stop there. He put a new rule in place demanding that any future changes to royal attendant status had to be approved by his office before taking effect. In a single move, William officially made himself a permanent institutional check on the Queen Consort's power over palace administration. That has never happened before in modern royal history, not in this specific way. This wasn't just a reaction, it was a firewall built to ensure no version of this plot could ever be secretly pieced together inside that palace again. But Prince William wasn't finished. He demanded a full review of every single administrative change made by Camilla's private office going back 18 months. And when the audit came back, it confirmed his worst fears. In that 18-month period, there were 4 separate times palace rules had been quietly changed in ways that directly helped either Camilla herself or her children's status within the family. The plot for the titles was the biggest and most serious, but it was not a one-time thing. And now William had documented proof of every single step. But here is the part that made William's blood run cold. He heard none of this from his father, not one single word. He found out from his aunt. King Charles William's own father, the man whose authority was behind every document in that palace, had known what was being plotted inside his own household. He had known all along, and he had said nothing. He didn't warn his son. He didn't stop his wife. He had chosen once again to just sit with the information and stay completely silent. William knows Charles cannot defend his wife because defending her means standing up to Anne and standing up to William. And standing against those two is something King Charles has never once been able to do. Not once in all the years this drama has been unfolding. Anne and William have always seen him for exactly what he is. And this moment proved it again with horrifying clarity. William had demolished Camilla's operation in a single afternoon. But what Charles's silence revealed that day may be the far more permanent and irreversible damage. Not to the plan, not even to Camilla's status inside the family, but to the marriage, to whatever Camilla believed about her husband when things got truly tough. Anne left William's office and went straight to Clarence's house. She was there to deliver the news in person. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. It was a full confrontation. Anne walked into Clarence's house and did not soften the blow one bit. She laid it all out on the table, every document in the paper trail that Camilla spent months building certain no one would ever find it. There was nothing to deny. There was nowhere to hide. It was all there. Anne told Camilla in the clearest possible language that it was over for good. The new oversight rules William had created meant that what she did could never be tried again. Not now, not 5 years from now, not in any form through any loophole under any other name. Camilla was reportedly shaking and couldn't speak a single word. And then came the moment that shattered something in Camilla that afternoon. Something no amount of future scheming could ever put back together. When Anne finished explaining everything they'd found and shut down, Camilla asked to speak with Charles. She needed in that completely devastating moment to believe he would finally step in, that this was the time he would choose her. Anne told her Charles was already informed and had chosen not to intervene. For many years Camilla had told people close to her that she always believed Charles would ultimately stand up for her if it came to a real head-on confrontation. That specific belief had been the one thing that pulled her through every previous humiliation. She had told herself every time that he was just being strategic, that he was picking his battles, that when it truly mattered, when the stakes were high enough, he would step forward and he would choose her. That belief died in that room. The meeting was over. Anne walked out and Camilla sat alone with the wreckage. Now here's the detail that makes the whole affair even more devastating. Tom and Laura had no idea any of this was happening. Camilla had orchestrated this entire secret operation without telling her children a single thing, without even asking if this was something they wanted for themselves. And now, because of what William had uncovered and officially recorded, their names were sitting in an official palace file as the targets of a secret operation their own mother ran without their consent. Every single appearance Tom or Laura made at a royal event going forward would now be scrutinized in a way it never was before. The attention now on them was not their own doing. Their mother had dragged it right to their doorstep. Camilla had not elevated her children. She had exposed them. The aftermath. When the dust finally settled, the consequences came down hard, fast, and without any mercy. William's office now oversees all future changes to royal attendance policies. The administrative influence Camilla had been patiently building since Queen Elizabeth's death was gone. The quiet power to adjust, reclassify, reposition, and nudge her family closer to the institution from within had been completely stripped away in a single afternoon, and Anne pushed for more. According to reports, she went after the 2005 condition itself, that non-negotiable line Queen Elizabeth had drawn as the price of Camilla's entry, and pushed for it to be formally written into a standing household rule. If that rule is made official, it would be the first time in modern royal history a queen consort's children are formally and permanently excluded from titles by a written institutional record. It would be a document that outlasts Charles's reign, outlasts Camilla's position entirely, and survives every future attempt by anyone to ever quietly reopen that question. The Parker Bowles family will never hold royal titles, not while Anne is watching, not while William holds the authority he has now formally taken. Camilla's position within the institution is now weaker than at any other point since she married Charles. She has lost whatever tiny margin of tolerance William had maintained in the years before this. She has confirmed to Anne, with documented proof, that she cannot be trusted to operate within her role. The damage is not just to one plan, it is to every relationship, every single arrangement, and every remaining thread of influence she needs to survive inside the firm. The debate over Camilla's fading influence is officially over, because frankly, it's already gone. The real question now is what cards she has left to play, and whether Anne and William already know exactly what's coming.